Governor Pat Quinn loses his battle on utility rates, and lawmakers consider his suggestions on gaming. That's up next on Capitol View. Hello, and thank you for tuning into the special veto session edition of Capitol View. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn with Illinois Issues Magazine, and with me today is Mike Lawrence, longtime State House commentator. Mike, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Charlie Wheeler, longtime State House reporter and director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield. Charlie, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And Benjamin Yount, State House Bureau Chief.
No, longtime State House Bureau Chief.
Longtime State House
News?
Bureau Chief
2 years.
for
That's
two
a long time.
two outlets, and Bureau Chief for Illinois State House News currently. Ben, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
First up on the docket today is the override of Governor Pat Quinn's veto of the smart grid bill. Can someone just kind of throw out the backstory on what has happened so far on this bill, Charlie?
Well, the legislation has been kind of controversial. Basically, it would allow Commonwealth Edison and Ameren, Illinois. ComEd supplies electricity to most of the northern part of the state, Ameren to the central and southern part of the state. It would allow them to see their rates go up over a 10-year period to generate money to upgrade the infrastructure and put in this kind of high-tech system for metering people's homes, detecting outages that ComEd says in the long run would save people money, but in the short run it's going to cost them more. The legislation passed this spring. Governor Quinn threatened to veto it, saying that he thought that it did not protect consumers adequately. Attorney General Madigan joined in that complaint or that criticism. The bill was held through a parliamentary maneuver for a while until suddenly later this summer the maneuver was removed, the bill went to the governor, he vetoed it, and then as you said it was overridden. And in my mind the bill was held until the sponsors, ComEd, Ameren, and their allies were able to assure themselves that they had enough votes to override it. And so then they sent it to Quinn, he does his perfunctory veto, the veto was overridden. I don't think anybody was surprised that it was overridden, although the speed with which it was done was kind of amazing, and you probably saw that in the House.
The House, I don't even think debated the issue. It just came up, voted, 74 votes, if my memory serves me correct, bing, bang, boom, it was out. It passed faster than the governor's veto on picking up roadkill and being able to skin it. There was far more debate on what to do with dead squirrel pelts than there was with this notion that ComEd is going to be able to charge people, I think I want to say an extra $3, $3.40 a month. For Ameren customers, it'd be a little closer to $5 for the whole year. But this was, Governor Pat Quinn made his stand on the smart grid bill. He spoke in Chicago before veto session. During veto session, he had a lengthy press conference in his office, and he did his level best. He talked tough, bring it on and make my day, I think were the sound bites out of that. And in a very almost cold manner, now looking back at it, the House did. They just threw the votes out and walked away, and now the governor is left looking, I don't want to say powerless, but he's certainly not looking good.
Yeah, it did move really fast. A lot of us that were in the Senate, the governor learned via Twitter or text message, hey, it's already gone through the House, no debate. No one stood up in the House to defend Quinn. Is this surprising that he couldn't find at least one ally in the House to stand up and defend him as governor?
Well, I think there's a fundamental disrespect in the legislature for Governor Quinn, and that was reflected in the way this happened. Also, there have been occasions, many occasions, when you have something this controversial, at least with several blocks of people, the AARP and others, that the leadership decides it's going to move quickly through and not allow a whole lot of debate on the bill, just get it done and move on.
I talked with the sponsor in the House, State Representative Kevin McCarthy, and he was personally offended by the governor's accusations or tough talk that ComEd and Ameren somehow bought this vote. Leading up to the veto session, the governor in his press conference talked about how much campaign contributions the two utilities had thrown around. I think the governor's phrase was, lawmakers have 3 loaves of bread under their arm from these companies. And McCarthy said, I think, what a lot of people understand, that one costs a lot of money to run for office, and you need to get that money from someplace. 2, campaign contributions at best guarantee access. He said that he was offended, and there were a number of other lawmakers who may have changed their vote, not necessarily because they believe in the basis of the legislation. They just don't like to be dictated to by a governor, and particularly by this governor, and that is also going to come into play here in a few minutes, I'm sure, when we talk about the gaming legislation, that the governor's tough talk on smart grid may have cost him votes, may have played well in the papers and on Chicago TV, but inside the 4 walls of the General Assembly, it may have cost him.
But regardless of who was offended, I mean, ComEd threw around a lot of money. They may have exploited a loophole. Is it the governor's place to point this out to the public, Charlie?
Well, yeah, he tries to make his case that this is bad for consumers. On the other hand, the climate in the country seems to be, let's focus on jobs and job creation. And the people who were pushing this bill had a pretty solid alliance behind them of labor interest, business interest, saying this will create jobs for Illinoisans. And so if you're a lawmaker and you realize that, hey, my local unions are for this, my local chamber of commerce is for this, the people who have a manufacturing plant in town, they're for this. Who's against it? Well, Lisa Madigan, Pat Quinn, some of the senior citizens. I think it's easier for me to go on the jobs issue with the labor unions and the business community.
Well, and I know the unions and the utilities worked legislators. They spoke with lawmakers. The halls were thick with Ameren and ComEd workers in their bright safety vests. Mike Jacobs, Senate sponsor, said he never once got a phone call from Pat Quinn. The complaint was that the governor was more than willing to talk to reporters about this, more than willing to talk to television cameras, but people at home, I don't have a vote in the General Assembly. I can write all the stories I want, but my name's not on the big board, and I don't get to push the buttons. And that was part of the frustration, was that the governor made the case publicly, but he did not work the vote count. And I think 74 is a reflection of that.
But those people at home, you know, they're going to see this increase. They may not really even be concerned with smart grid. It's pretty complicated. It's not going to impact people right away. How much are lawmakers maybe going to be living this down when they run next year?
I think that depends on groups like the AARP. They ran ads challenging legislators to stand up to ComEd and Ameren, and they said they would keep track of them, that they would monitor how they voted, and there would be a price to be paid. I think we'll see in the next election whether there is that follow through, or whether AARP and other groups are going to judge lawmakers on other issues as well, where the lawmakers may have been more friendly to their position. A lot of this really depends on how hard the people who oppose this bill push around election time. But the other thing is that a lot of these lawmakers are not going to face significant challenges in the next election because of the way redistricting is done in Illinois, and because of other factors that favor incumbents.
One of the ways that this bill was able to pass was that a trailer bill was worked up that ran this week that added some additional consumer protections, added in some money for rate relief programs for low-income consumers. How big of a role did that play in this, and will Governor Quinn sign this bill even though he opposes the overall plan?
I think that because the governor talked tough, he talked himself into a box. And this again gets back to, how does Pat Quinn interact with legislators? If you can't stand there and pound the podium. We had a governor that did that, and he's awaiting sentencing. Not because he pounded the podium, but he was made irrelevant very, very quickly by the General Assembly, who just had no use for that. Pat Quinn has almost done that here. He talked so tough that he left no room to negotiate, and the politics of the speaker are always the politics of victory. And I don't think that Pat Quinn quite understands what that means. The governor needs to move towards the politics of victory and not this populist base that he always goes back to. He boxed himself in, and I don't know if there's any way that he can even get out without looking weak or weaker.
Well, it occurs to me that he doesn't have any choice but to sign that bill. He said that it was meaningless, but on the other hand, I think rationally that bill does make changes that if you're someone who disagrees with the main thrust of the initial bill, the damage or the stink about the initial bill is somewhat mitigated by the changes in the trailer. So if you want to, as Ben says, pound the podium and say, I'm going to veto this one too, you wind up getting your veto overridden again, because this does provide a fig leaf for lawmakers to go back and say, well, yeah, the first one was kind of bad, but we fixed it with the trailer bill. So I don't think he has any choice but to go ahead and sign it and maybe say, okay, I got outvoted in the legislature. I still think the initial bill was bad. I think it gives the utilities the right to pick your pocket. This trailer bill isn't everything that I would want, but at least it limits how deep they can go in your pocket. And so I'm going to sign it reluctantly or something like that.
I think he likened it to perfume on a skunk, but some perfume on a skunk is better than nothing, I guess.
Yes. As someone who's actually run into skunks at times in the past, I would agree perfume would be a big improvement.
And
it's now legal for you to collect that pelt.
Just to clarify for Springfield viewers, this bill actually will not affect Springfield rates. Your rates may go up or down, but they won't have anything to do with the smart grid. So let's move on to gaming. Governor Pat Quinn also had some suggestions for the gaming plan that passed in the spring. He said that he's fine with having 5 casinos. He's not okay with having slots at the racetracks, which looks like it may be a deal breaker. Lawmakers put his plan into a bill. They were going to run it this week. They didn't quite get around to it because maybe there's more things going on. Ben, can you catch us up a little bit?
There was a flurry of activity. There may have been a meeting scheduled to talk only about gaming. There may have been a meeting at which gaming was talked about. This, from the outside looking in, it again, did the governor come to his senses, or did he cave, or did the General Assembly want to play nice on this? But it's all now being pushed off to the second week of the veto session. I had a conversation with Lou Lang, who is the gambling sponsor in the House, and he said that he had 4 or 5 legislators who were willing to change their vote from no to yes because they didn't like the way that the governor, again, handled this negotiation with the General Assembly. They may not agree with the gaming expansion, they just disagree with the governor to the point where they were willing to change their vote. They're going to have to make up a lot of downstate votes. I'd heard 20 or 30 at one point if there were no slots at the racetracks, nothing for the horsemen, nothing at the Illinois State Fairgrounds. Although at least the folks in Danville and Rockford are happy. Talk to locals there; they are hanging on. They're so happy that they finally made the list, even though the list may now be thrown in the trash and we have to start all over again. There's a lot that has to happen between the now and the time that it could be voted on. I don't know. I think that with most gaming pieces, and you guys have seen these before, there are just so many moving parts. One thing goes off the rails and the entire plan could become apart.
Well, and Senator Terry Leak made the point that he's been working for like 20 years to achieve something similar to this plan. Both of you have seen those efforts over the years. Is this dead in the water? It's looking like it's struggling more and more every day, or is there still a hope here?
I think it's difficult to tell. It looks like it may be in real trouble. Because as you said and Ben said, it's tough enough, or it was tough enough to get the votes for the bill that passed in the spring. Now, I think Governor Quinn was expressing reservations that a lot of people in the state have about the extent of the gambling expansion that was contained in that legislation. The problem, obviously, is as you reduce that expansion or cut back on it, you lose votes in the General Assembly. I think part of the problem, too, was that an entire summer went by with Quinn saying he had problems, but not defining exactly what they were. And I think there was a missed opportunity on the part of the governor to try to sit down and work something out that would address at least most of his reservations and still leave enough in place to make a significant difference. I think the other thing here is that to the extent this legislation has support from people who aren't crazy about gambling, it's because of the state's fiscal situation and the need for additional revenue. And frankly, I think even if a gambling measure does pass, it still falls far short of what is needed to squarely address the state's fiscal problems.
Well, one of the ways that some lawmakers are looking to address some of the fiscal issues that we have is reforming our pension system. House Minority Leader Tom Cross came up with a plan during spring session that really didn't have the support at the time to pass, but now he's saying, I have the votes that I need. Charlie, can you explain a little bit what that plan would do?
Well, basically what Cross was talking about is a change in the pension system that would apply to current state workers. And what it would say is you will no longer be able to collect the benefits that you thought you were going to be entitled to from the day this becomes law on forward, unless you are willing to pay a lot more for those benefits. And if you don't want to pay more, then you can accept fewer benefits and work longer, the same as people who are recent hires. Or in the alternative, you could go to a 401k plan where the state would contribute money that you would then invest to provide for your own retirement. The difficulty from my judgment is that I believe the Constitution guarantees that you cannot change benefits going forward for people who are currently covered by one of the 5 pension systems. Now, in a sense, there's a conflict of interest for me because I'm a member of the university retirement system, and if I ever get around to retiring, I suppose I'd be entitled to a pension. But I felt that way before, when I was still working for the Sun-Times, that there was this constitutional guarantee that you can't change benefits for people who are in the system, even going forward. For new people, you can put in a whole new system. That's not a problem, but it's the benefits for the people going forward.
That's going to be part of Cross's problem, because it seems that Senate President John Cullerton is of the mindset that the Constitution is going to be problematic. Pragmatic, do you pass a bill that's only going to end up getting challenged in court, or do you try and get what you can another way? How much of this it needs to be a symbolic move for Cross? I think that once we get past the budget battle, where you're going to see the legislature again try and dictate to the governor every dime in the state budget, including the union negotiations with AFSCME, I think that the spring session of 2012 is going to be all about pensions. And I don't know that they'll get it done between January and June, but it's coming to a point where it has to be dealt with. It can no longer be ignored. The state's going to pay nearly $5 billion for a pension payment next year, and that's going to be all cash. The more you have to pay for retirement, the less you have to pay for everything else. And as there was wailing and gnashing of teeth over spending just $33 billion, you're going to lose another billion of that almost in pension alone. So you're going to have to spend 32 and some change, even with 3% growth. The money is just not there, and something has to be done. I don't know what it is. I think but I think 2012 is going to be the spring of pensions.
And the question is, will Quinn even sign a bill that he thinks maybe will not be constitutional as well? Leader Cross said today that Quinn kind of brought that up a few times in the meeting today. He hasn't taken a stance, really. He's been kind of back and forth on that issue.
Really? Pat Quinn back and forth?
But if he were to veto this bill, I just don't see the votes there for an override.
It's going to be very, very difficult. I think that
I was going to say, I saw a news report earlier today in which Cross is claiming that there has been a deal worked out with the big money people up in Chicago, the corporate CEOs, the Civic Federation, Commercial Club, and others, where 30 Democrats, 30 Republicans will vote for it in the House. So that's 60 votes. But that is not 71 for an override, should Quinn veto the bill. And that doesn't address the question of what will happen in the Senate, where Senate President John Cullerton's legal counsel has come out with a very lengthy analysis, which, as someone who's read it, to me is pretty convincing that you can't go ahead and do it. And it goes back to the debates in the Constitutional Convention where the issue was raised, hey, if you put this in the Constitution, that means they can't change benefits in the future. And the delegate said, yeah, that's the point of it. So,
well, I think there have been conflicting legal opinions on this, and I think the supporters of this measure, one like it, would point to legal opinions as well from some pretty prominent law firms and lawyers. There may well be constitutional questions. I certainly respect Charlie's position on this, but there have been, again, many times in the past where legislatures have approved and governors have signed bills where the constitutional foundation or of those bills was under attack as the bills went through. And there were questions about constitutionality, and the bills were passed knowing that they would go to the court. What we have here, though, and as Ben indicated, it's a situation where the governor and the legislature just can't walk away from this problem. I mean, it's a huge problem, and something's got to happen on it. And the solution is not going to be easy. The solution is not going to be popular or widely popular. But if it's not dealt with, I don't see how the state gets out of the mess it's in. And this isn't the only part of that has to be dealt with. But we're not going to get back on solid fiscal footing in this state unless some very painful and unpopular decisions are made.
The last thing that I would say about pensions, I would be very interested to see what a vote count would be, because there is no natural, there's no natural breakdown as to which lawmakers from which areas, from which parties would support this. You'd see broad-based opposition, but it doesn't fit into the narratives that we're used to writing. Republicans, Democrats, Chicago, downstate, rural, urban. I would be very, very interested to see if they do have 60. I would love to see who they are and where they come from.
Well, to me, it's interesting because here you have Tom Cross from Oswego, who's the Republican leader. You have Mike Madigan from Chicago, who's the Speaker of the House. And last spring, they said they had this plan and they were going to move it, and they couldn't get the votes. So I'm thinking to myself, I can't really remember when the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader together couldn't manufacture 60 votes for something. Well, that gives you an idea of the pushback and the apprehension on the behalf of rank and file members to vote for something that is going to be intensely unpopular with every school teacher in their district.
And Madigan hasn't yet publicly promised these votes. I talked with his spokesperson right before we started the show, and he said that there's an amendment coming forward this week, and they'll review it, and then they'll do a roll call. So it's not a done deal yet. It's definitely still in the process. But here at the remainder of the show, I'd like to talk just a little bit generally about the budget. Today, a budget bill came through, Ben, that I know that you've been following to try to get some administrators paid. It failed. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The regional superintendents had thought they were going to walk out of veto session with a paycheck, the first since July 1st. Fell one vote short in the House. The plan, which was put forward by the governor, picked up by State Representative Frank Montino, was to use personal property replacement tax money. Corporations, trusts, and I want to say universities pay into the PPRT. It was money that local governments would have gotten had they paid taxes like everyone else. About $1.4 billion in there total. The money split 60% school districts, 20% for cities, and then another 20% for other municipality governments, county boards, park districts. $14 million was the total that was going to be used to pay these 44 regional superintendents. But the mood in the legislature still seems to be they would rather override the governor's veto, pay the regional superintendents out of GRF and move forward. I don't know if it's an opposition that they're getting pushback from their park districts or their school districts who don't want to share the money, or if it's a philosophical difference. But these poor regional superintendents can't catch a break, and part of the problem is this assumption that the General Assembly, as a body, has a conscience. I mean, there are lawmakers who are more than willing to let someone work for free. They wouldn't do it. Lawmakers wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. But they're more than willing to let other people do it. I think we'll see another try the second week. But there's some timing issues. You can't just introduce new legislation. These folks, if it goes badly next week, they may be waiting till January.
And can you explain just a little bit what these ladies and gentlemen do and why this is going on?
Regional superintendents are elected. They're local elected officials. Some have one county, some have a number of counties. And it's their job to sign off on a myriad of paperwork and state mandates. They seem to be the landing point for any time legislators say, we ought to do this. We ought to make sure that every school bus driver in the state gets a background check. Well, the bus companies don't do that because they're private. Schools can't do that because they don't have any money. So that falls on these regional superintendents. And the governor proposed in his budget way back in February, March, that he wanted to get rid of these folks. There's always the second guessing of, did he realize exactly what they did? I remember talking to regional superintendents in July. They had to sign off on occupancy permits for brand new high schools. A $96 million high school in DeKalb, had that man walked off the job the day he didn't get a paycheck, that school would still be sitting empty because by state law, they are the only ones who can sign those kinds of things. I wouldn't be. I think I would be amazed if they didn't work out a deal to pay them for this year. We may see legislative action in the spring session to fix the situation, which may mean eliminating the positions.
And we're going to have to leave it at that. Thanks for tuning in this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more veto session news. And please follow us on Facebook at CapitolView Politics. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn with Illinois Issues. Thanks for being here, Mike Lawrence, Charlie Wheeler, and Benjamin Yount. And we'll see you next time on Capitol View.